United States is currently engaged in several high-stakes negotiations across the Middle East and around the world. President Trump has departed from traditional diplomatic norms, opting instead for unconventional negotiating strategies to address the crisis in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, Iran's nuclear program, Venezuela, and trade. His approach has emphasized compressed timelines and the appointment of negotiators from outside the federal government's usual ranks. I'm here with Jon Alterman, director of the CSIS Middle East Program, to discuss the promise and hazards posed by this shift in diplomatic strategy, especially in connection with the Middle East. Can you think of a precedent for the Trump administration's running of so many simultaneous high-stakes negotiations?
I can't. It really feels to me like for every administration, there's been one thing they've been focused on. The president's been engaged, whether it was Arab-Israeli talks in the Clinton administration, even the Iran talks in the Clinton administration. There's a sense, I think, that a lot of presidents have that they need to be directly involved. They need to set parameters for the negotiations, and they have a team that is single-mindedly focused on those negotiations. I really can't think of any president who would want simultaneous negotiations going on out of a sense that making the choices negotiations requires a lot of presidential bandwidth, and there's only so much presidential bandwidth to go around.
What's unique about the Trump administration's approach? What are the potential risks and benefits?
One of the things that's unique is the president seems to want to have some people running multiple negotiations simultaneously. I've never seen that before. Somebody like Dennis Ross had a team, a small team, that was doing only Arab-Israeli issues, and that's enough to handle. What Steve Witkoff is doing, what Rickenell is doing multiple negotiations and not really having deep engagement with the bureaucracy, either the State Department or the intelligence community, to inform those negotiations, I think is really different. What's also different is you have people whose experience isn't spending decades doing diplomatic negotiations. You have people who spent decades doing commercial negotiations, often on much shorter timeframes. And what I think is that the president's sense is that that commercial knowledge, the commercial experience, will help reach successful deals more quickly. I think the danger is that you can reach deals more quickly, but they won't be better deals, that there will be things left undone, which will either require future negotiations or could lead to future conflict. The president, I think, and the leadership seems not to really value a lot of what the diplomatic community has done, the customs of the diplomatic community for a long time. And whether his distrust of them is well-placed or misplaced is something I'm sure we're going to discover as we look at the outcomes of these negotiations, both in terms of the negotiations themselves and their results over the coming years.
And finally, how have U.S. allies and partners in the Middle East responded to President Trump's negotiating style?
In many ways, folks in the Middle East themselves are transactional. I think a lot of governments in the Middle East think there's actually no solution to many of the problems. And one of the criticisms they had of previous administrations is they labored under the illusion that if you just struck the right agreement, then the problem would go away. And for countries that, for example, are concerned with the Iranian nuclear weapons program, they thought that naivete on the part of American negotiators endangered them. But I think there's also some degree of discomfort over the potential haste, some degree of discomfort, certainly in Israel, about the concessions the U.S. might give to the Iranians with regard to the nuclear program. Ultimately, I think all these governments know they can't control the United States. And I think that in general, the Gulf Arabs are more comfortable with negotiating with the Iranians as long as they have the Americans on their side. The Israelis are less comfortable with the negotiations with the Iranians. We'll see where that difference comes up. I think the Israelis are more comfortable with the Trump administration's approach to Gaza issues, to Palestine issues more generally. The Gulf Arabs are less comfortable with it. So I think there are differences, but ultimately, I do think that this is a region that feels comfortable with negotiations and has limited expectations for what you can get out of negotiations, and ultimately feels that having a transactional president who feels some affinity for them is better than a less transactional president who wants to change them, who seems to have disdain for the way that they either deal with their domestic issues or deal with their diplomatic issues. And overall, both the government's attitude toward the Trump administration, but also in many ways the public's attitude toward the Trump administration is much more positive than I think a lot of foreign policy elites in the United States.
Thank you very much, Jon.
Thank you, Asher.